The average landing cost of imported premium motor spirit has dropped to 829 naira 77 kobo per litre, now lower than the ex-depot price of locally produced fuel, highlighting a significant market shift. This price gap prompted President Bola Tinubu to approve a 15% import tariff on petrol and diesel to protect domestic refining, especially the Dangote refinery. Meanwhile, OPEC Plus has approved a modest 137,000 barrels per day output increase for December, but will pause, further hikes in the first quarter of 2026, a move analysts say helped limit a deeper fall in oil prices. Morgan Stanley has raised its Brent crude forecast for early 2026 to $60 per barrel, citing the production pause and U.S. sanctions on Russian oil majors Rosneft and Lukoil. Temitope Kolade, Associate Director, Oil, Gas and Power, Andersen Nigeria, joins me now. Good morning. It's great to have you in.
Thanks for having me, John. Good morning.
Right. So as it stands right now, imported petrol actually lands cheaper at 829 naira per litre compared to locally refined fuel at 877 naira. What are the dynamics informing this difference? Let's start there.
Yeah, thanks for that.
All right. It appears you are muted, if I'm not mistaken.
Hello, can you
All
hear
right,
me?
go ahead. We're with you.
Yeah, thanks for that. I was going to say that one of the things you may not have also mentioned is the fact that the government is then imposing a 15% import tariff on the refined products. So yeah, good on the side of reduction of the landing costs, but then when you then put on the that's duty that they have to pay for bringing it into Nigeria, then it becomes uncompetitive to work with the fact that Dangote also provides the refined products at less costs to those who are willing to partner with them. And what that means for the Nigerian market is that you might be going to a point where the importers can no longer do business, and then we rely solely on imported products. While some would celebrate that move, I think that it's important to always ensure that some cautious balance is struck, right, such that we don't then begin to rely on just one source for the products, and when there is disappointment down the line, we have no other place to run to.
All right, and we've seen major marketers like Coando, they've suspended petrol imports altogether as local refining obviously ramps up. But with the new price offerings, how are these companies adjusting to this new market reality? What are the strategies, that will determine which players stay competitive and which ones bow out?
Yeah, again, it ties to what we were saying earlier, and you already alluded to it, that Dangote, particularly in their financials for the first 9 months of the year, have said that, you know what, we're no longer dealing in importation since we see that the arbitrage margins that we get from importing is lost, right? Of course, we're also raising inventory, working capital is rising, and so it's no longer sustainable for us to continue to do this. We think that what Dangote is doing is good. We think that being able to supply local demand, domestically, is something that should also be celebrated, and so we're going away from that. And what then happens to other marketers? Other marketers are still struggling, and so at this point, for them to survive, they've got to start thinking about value chain integration. Are they able to secure their offtake from Dangote refinery? Don't forget that Dangote is also saying that we want to go into getting the products into the hinterland and everywhere. We want to control logistics. So how much of that do we already have some of these marketers doing? How are these marketers able to manage their FX position? Because it means that if they want to continue to import from outside Nigeria, they would have to deal with those imports challenges and the fact that they need foreign exchange to deal with that. How strong are their distribution and retail network? Again, because Dangote may not already have that sort of network across the country. It's building it. So how much of this do these marketers have, and how much of that they can they leverage for how long again? So those are some of the survival strategies they should be thinking of. But I think it's at this point they should begin to look at how commercially flexible their businesses are. Are they able to strike some sort of B2B business deals such that they're just maybe providing jet fuels to those who need aviation fuel and all of those, such that they are not just relying on what's happening in the general market. And if there is the time that the marketers need to do better market intelligence and plan into the future, I think it's now.
All right, now is the time. But there's also the big question about supply, right? And you've hinted at that earlier on. What happens if local refineries cannot meet national demand, right? Dangote Refinery had claimed that they can meet and exceed this, but we know that some are also talking about the pricing. So what's your take on this?
Yeah, well, like you've said already, Dangote would say to you that yes, they can meet the demand, but we know that in reality, it's always been difficult tracking down the numbers, right? The question is whether the volume in tanks is equal to nationwide effective supply, right? What's the distribution network of Dangote today? What's the depot capacity? Have they perfected the plans around the logistics and all of that? Those questions would come, right? So if there are still going to be distribution bottlenecks, if there are issues around quality controls, or there will still be commercial disputes as we've seen in the last couple of weeks and months, then there are things to tighten to ensure that we're not just dealing with a single sourcing sort of situation, such that we won't run to that point where there will be temporary shortages or even price spikes because we're relying on just a single source. So those are things to look out for. I think this is a time for the regulator, NMDPRA in particular, to do their work better and ensure that, the generality of consumers in Nigeria are not suffering for whatever challenges that we're going to face from just having to rely on local refineries alone.
I think that's very important, the people not having to bear the brunt of this shift and reform and tariff, even though it is to protect our local industry. But from a macroeconomic angle, who benefits more at the end of the day from this tariff, right? The government through tariffs, the economy, the people. Who benefits and who feels the squeeze or the crunch?
Okay, yeah, I think it really depends on what side of the fence anyone is to say who benefits the most. But from a broad economic perspective, if we refine locally more and we're able to meet demands locally, and there is less pressure on our foreign exchange reserves because we're not going to be importing a lot, it also means that there will be more local jobs, so to speak, and of course, we can begin to lengthen the value chain as well, do other things beyond just PMS in particular, the petroleum motor spirit. But that net benefit that we would see really depends on the price competitiveness, the effectiveness of those refineries down the line, and whether the foreign exchange that we say we're saving for the country will be deployed into productive use. If refined product is consistently more expensive than imports, then consumers and downstream businesses will begin to lose. Let's not forget that there was a time we said we're going to do Shopee, and that the gains from taking away the subsidy from diesel, for instance, was going to be used to develop the refineries, but we didn't see that happen. So it really depends what gets done with whatever gains that we make from this for us to then decide who has benefited the most. But I think that the larger population of Nigerians stand a lot to gain, depending on how well this is managed by the relevant stakeholders, whether the regulators, the government, and of course those who are doing the refining.
All right, let's come to OPEC Plus now. They have raised production 2.9 million barrels per day since April. But now they are putting a pause, right, on its output hike in early 2026. What's your take on Morgan Stanley's $60 per barrel Brent forecast? How will that influence global energy markets? And what are the overall implications of this move from OPEC Plus?
Well, to start with, I think that this sort of policy from OPEC Plus is just to ensure that the price, and that's what OPEC has always tried to do, ensure that price of crude is ticking up and is beneficial to the members, right? But we must quickly add that that doesn't eliminate supply risk. What they want to do is that they don't want so much to be in the market such that the price is good enough for those who are producing. But what about the non-OPEC suppliers? And what about the weak demand that we're seeing from Asia, for instance, and some other parts of the world because of the penetration of EVs, right? So I think that also then reflects what Morgan Stanley's position is with respect to saying we're doing about $60 per barrel forecasts for the first half of 2026, right? The sort of geopolitical sanctions that we're seeing across the world and the fact that the market is looking into a lower medium price volatility is what they're trying to reflect in that. And what that means for us as Nigeria is that, investors will try to be cautious at this point because they know that if they invest in the upstream sector, it's not going to give them as much value. Again, if the dollar is ticking up, it also means that they've got to invest at bigger costs, right? And so fiscal planning is something that we need to deal with very carefully because in the first place, as an high-cost producer in Nigeria, we spend more than some other economies that produce crude in terms of what they're able to, the cost per barrel.
I mean, so many shifts happening at the same time, both upstream and downstream. But we have the International Energy Agency. They are warning of a 4 million barrels per day oil surplus in 2026. How realistic is that, and what are the factors that you believe are driving that continued weakness in Asian oil demand?
Okay, well, I think again it's not unconnected with the conversations we've had earlier, right? And I think that the position they're taking is plausible, right? Number one, because there is that near record planned supply additions, both from non-OPEC and OPEC increases, right? And they're looking at that and they're saying, hey, we've got to look at the deceleration, number two, that is happening in demand growth assumptions with respect to the efficiency gains that we're seeing in some parts of Asia, China in particular, the adoption of electric vehicles, and of course, the lingering weakness in key demand centers as well, right? The inventory that is being stocked up in Asia is also one key concern that has made them to say, hey, demand growth is increasing, and what it then means is that we've got to revise supply to ensure that there could be a time where there is going to be a supply, there's going to be some surplus, and that would also, result in some sort of lower prices for oil.
Indeed. And speaking of lower prices, we have the dollar edging up on cloudy rate cuts outlook. How is a stronger dollar affecting oil importing economies like Nigeria? And do you see delayed U.S. interest rate cuts perhaps reducing oil consumption further in the year 2026?
So for Nigeria, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because our foreign exchange receipts are oil-linked, a strong dollar means that on the one hand, it would appear that we're going to get some better naira. When you convert the dollar to naira. But if oil price receipts are, of course, they are dollar denominated, it will bring more naira. The net export volumes would also matter, and of course, the CBN policy also matters, right? But again, what's then going to happen with that delayed Fed rate cuts, right, the dollar would maybe remain firm for a longer period, and it could depress global demand growth. And what that means is that even though we're producing more oil, we might not have people who will take those up, and that will not give us a lot of volume in terms of supply to the rest of the world. And it then also matters how we're dealing with these imports that we're talking about, because we've been able to downscale imports specifically for refined products. It means that yes, we could strike some balance somewhere, but again, if we don't have a lot of outputs going out there in the world, it might not really be very great for us as a country. And so I think that this is about the time where fiscal discipline is very critical for the government.
And you already touched on the next question and highlighted fiscal discipline, but beyond just Nigeria, looking at the continent now, and how will African oil producers adjust their fiscal plan if oil prices drop below $70 per barrel? Also, what role will perhaps renewable energy growth, how will it play in shaping OPEC Plus's decisions next year?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the conversation around renewables. Recall the conversation we've also had with respect to the IEA's position, and of course, Morgan Stanley's position with respect to the price per barrel of Brent crude, right? So the growth of renewables is very critical to those conversations, right? And this sort of structural demand that we're getting, the lower demand for oil. So overall, what is driving this is that some parts of the world, and not just the Western world now, but also Asia, is saying that we've got to manage the way we use energy, and we've got to move towards the renewable position for some sustainability concerns. And so what that also then means is that we might not begin to get very aggressive output in terms of crude production, and it also then means something for African producers that you mentioned earlier, how we need to demonstrate a lot of fiscal discipline by cutting capital spending and the drawdown on our reserves. There must be that reprioritization for recurrent spending, and the sort of borrowings that we're also seeing should also be managed, because again, if you borrow from the likes of IMF, the World Bank, what it means is that you're borrowing in foreign currency and you've got to pay back in foreign currencies. We just talked about how the dollar is getting stronger. It means that you need a lot more of your local currency to pay back. And so what that could mean is that infrastructure projects could be delayed. There could be delays to social programs, and of course public sector hiring. So these things have some sort of down the line implications for our governments here in Africa, and it's also important to then see how do we strike a balance in ensuring that we diversify beyond just relying on oil.
Indeed, and that was the final question, diversification. In response to all this projected surplus, where do our governments turn in 2026?
Well, I think that if you listen to President Tinubu, for instance, he would say to you that he's making efforts to diversify. What we need is beyond the words. We need implementation. We need actions. We need the common man on the street to see the effect of those sort of diversification. We know that these things don't happen overnight. There is that need to also set clear short and medium-term measures and key performance indicators, such that everyone can see that indeed we are widening the tax basis, we are accelerating liquidity friendly reforms, right? Such that it's not a case that the likes of investment in renewables, manufacturing, or even agricultural value chain are going to be struggling. There must be incentives for those sectors of the economy to do very well, right? And to ensure that we are well insured against this sort of cyclical price shocks that we get from investment in our oil sector. And I think that's really what we need to do to ensure that going forward, it's not just business as usual.
Indeed. Thank you so much for your time. Temitope Kolade, Associate Director, Oil, Gas and Power at Andersen Nigeria.